So introducing business logic. So we're going to talk about business logic features, and that's our middle section on the left-hand side there. We're going to talk about workflow rules and validation rules. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of, it's sort of a, we'll get into greater complexity on Wednesday, do more tricky things, but here we're just going to cover the basics of queues, workflows, formula fields, cross objects, summaries, all that kind of good stuff. All right, so the first topic are queues. All right, what are queues? Well, in Salesforce, you can create something called a queue, and the queue is a group of users who can be the owner of a record. Now, by default, the owner of a record is a specific user. And so user X, whoever it may be, you could assign that user to be the owner of the record. Now, let me just show you what is ownership. So if I click on this candidate record, notice that Phil Katz here is the owner of the record. Now, from a security standpoint, record level access, that means that Phil has certain privileges in terms of being able to edit, transfer ownership, share this with other people, delete, so on and so forth, that other users do not have. Okay? Now, there's situations where you want multiple people to be the owner. And the way that you enable multiple people to be the owner of a record is you create what's called a queue, and then you add those users or define those users as being members of the queue. Then, when you want to, let me go actually to position so this actually works. Then, here, Phil Katz is also the owner of this record. If I click on the change link here, in my case, I'm also the system administrator. We'll talk about that tomorrow when we get into security, but I can do this because I'm the sysadmin. I can specify that I want the owner of this record to be a queue. And now what's going to happen is that this record essentially is owned by multiple people, all the members of this queue. Okay? So all a queue is ownership by multiple people, the members of the queue. Now, where do we define the queues? Well, in the setup menu, over here under Manage Users, and then there's a Queues section. And what we can do here is we can click to edit a queue. And what we can do is identify, or I'm sorry, what the available objects and the selected objects, you can limit what records this queue can own. Okay? So in this case, only candidate and position records can be owned by this queue. Okay? I could add more there. But the key thing is that, well, who are the members of the queue? Who are the people that are a part of this queue and therefore have those ownership privileges? Okay? You don't have to limit necessarily to users. We'll talk about public groups and roles tomorrow, but there are other things that are available in terms of ownership, or members, I shouldn't say ownership. There's only two things that an owner of a record can be, a queue or a user. But there are other things available in terms of how we classify who makes up the members of the queue. Okay?
You cannot select other queues to be member of this queue, right?
No, yeah, you can't. It's not, you don't have the ability to have a queue being a member of a queue. There's also the queue email, which you can send basically an email address so that when ownership is updated to be the queue, it sends an email to there. And then there's also a checkbox, an optional checkbox for send email to members. And what this does is when the queue becomes the owner of a record, this gives you the ability to send an email out to the members of the queue to notify them that they're now the owner. Yeah.
The queue email address, is that set up within your company, or it's being set up in Salesforce?
My company is Salesforce. You had me there. I'm like, wait a minute. So you would be the one who would set up this email address in Exchange, for instance. So that this is probably an alias for a group of people, or maybe some sort of person who has a responsibility. So this email address would be defined within your email server to have, yeah. So this would be defined by your company. So, okay.
The name queues doesn't sound intuitive. Is there a reason why it's called queues? Or
Good question. So why is this called why do we call them queues? Well, part of the reason is that we have roles and public groups, and unfortunately we have profiles. It's like, you know, all those words that denote, I don't know, multiple people sharing something are kind of taken. But so the reason they're called queues is that think about CRM-oriented stuff. Okay, so think about, let's say you have a sales team, and so the website that you have is collecting leads. Now, one of the things that people do with the Salesforce automation is they create a queue where all the leads that come in are owned by the queue. And then people will go, okay, they'd go in and they go, okay, this one applies to me, or this is my industry, or whatever it may be. And so they could then go in and operate on those records with ownership level privileges, but everyone on the team has ownership level privileges for all those sales leads. Same thing, think about the flip side of that, which is our service and support application, cases. So customers submitting cases for service, support, whatever. Same thing, there's a team of people, they all have ownership. What we would do is assign it to the queue. So in that case, it's not, technically it's not a queue, it's a pool. It's not, there's no set line or order to the records that are owned by the queue. So unlike, you know, when I think of queues, I think of like MQ series, and it's like you're delivering messages, and you can, I don't know, it's a lot more oriented towards being a line as opposed to this is really a pool. So there's not really an order to anything in here. So, all right.
If somebody in the queue takes ownership of a record or a lead,
yeah,
does the queue still own that lead?
No, because then they would change the ownership of the record to themselves. So so now let's pretend for a second that, so here's my inside sales rep that's owned by the recruiter queue. Let's pretend for a second that I'm a member of that queue. I would then go, okay, inside sales reps, I'm the VP of sales. I'm going to change the ownership to myself. So because I'm the owner, I can do that. So we'll also, this is a little bit, we're jumping ahead because we'll come back and talk about what ownership means. What are the different permissions that you gain in being the owner? So we'll actually come back to this. Okay?
Is there a default owner or queue? It's like when you create an object.
The creator is really the default owner, but yeah. So whoever is the user that's creating the record, that's by default, that's going to be the owner of the record.
So all the objects has a specific owner.
Yes, so every record has an owner, yeah.
So we cannot define owners default for an object. For example, a financial object.
You could. So actually, we'll in not this lab, but the next lab, we will create a workflow rule that does something like what you're describing. So you can enable that automation. All right, let's jump into our. Let's do this. Let's jump into our lab exercise. This is a really short one, so let's work on this for a little bit. This is a pretty quick one, and then we'll continue and talk about workflow and actually using the queue. So unfortunately, we're going to create a queue, but we haven't used it yet. It's not until we get to the next exercise that we use it. Okay? All right, workflow rules. Workflow rules allow us to perform some automation. Specifically, they allow us to execute actions whenever a database write occurs, and those actions can take many different forms. Now, the way that a workflow rule executes is that upon a record being saved to the database, that will then fire off the workflow rule if it meets the entry criteria. In other words, if the record itself meets the entry criteria of the rule. What's going to happen is that when it fires off, it can do one of two things. It can, well, it can do both actually, but it can fire off immediate actions, or it can fire off what are called time-triggered actions. And what it does is it starts a time trigger, and then at some later time, it then fires off those actions. Okay? So when you're defining a workflow rule, what you're going to do is you're going to define the entry criteria, which is really which records will this workflow rule apply to. There's essentially three different types of criteria. The object type, there's evaluation criteria, I'll show you those in a second, and then rule criteria, which are some logical rules by which we limit the records that go into this. Then we identified two sets of actions, one set that executes immediately, and then actually we can create multiple sets of time triggers and therefore multiple sets of actions that fire off on different time trigger scales. Now typically the immediate ones, we use immediate actions to sort of automate doing updates or changes, versus the time-triggered ones are more along the lines of a reminder or a follow-up. So if our record hasn't changed status after 10 days, then let's send an email to someone telling them something needs to happen. Okay? There are four types of actions that we can perform if we are executing a workflow action. The first is send an email alert. The second is to assign a task to a user. The third is to update a field on the current object. And then the fourth is to post an XML, basically a web services document, out to some target system to update that system. Okay, that's called outbound messaging. All right, so let me just show you what are the different options when you create a workflow rule. So when you create a workflow rule, what you do is here under workflow and approvals, and specifically under workflow rules, what you do is you create a new rule. All right. When you create a workflow rule, so it's hopefully I didn't do that too quick, but create and then workflow and approvals and workflow rules. Click on create new rule and you identify the first criteria, which is, well, what object type does this apply to? Okay. So in this case, why don't we do position? Okay. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to fill out things like the rule name. So sticking with my naming convention here, so demo rule. And then there's the evaluation criteria and then the rule criteria. The evaluation criteria, there's three options. Let me start with the second two. So only when a record is created, whenever a record is edited or created, and then finally, anytime a record is created or edited and did not previously meet the entry criteria. Okay. Now what that first one, the long one, the first one, what that essentially says is only fire off these actions once. Because if you play out the logic, what it means is that you know, if it previously met the criteria, then we're not going to continue to do the same thing over. Okay. All right. All right. You can, the final thing that you specify are the rule criteria. And for instance, you could say, for instance, you know, duration in days is, you know, greater than 10. So you could say field, you know, this is equal to, you know, San Francisco, something like this. So you can create different filters or requirements associated with your workflow rule so that it will only apply to certain records. So in this case, this one is ANDed, therefore the duration in days must be greater than 10 and the location must equal San Francisco, California. Okay? All right, so then we could click on Save and Next. By the way, there's also advanced options, and if you wanted to, you could create something like an OR condition. Okay, so, all right, I'm gonna do Save and Next. And then it's within here that you identify the actions. All right, so tomorrow we're gonna cover, or I'm sorry, actually Wednesday, we're going to cover time-triggered actions. But today, what we're going to do is just immediate workflow actions. Here I could do a field update. And what I could do is, for instance, on the current record, let's update a field, and you know, let's do something like set pay grade equal to something, I don't know. So you can basically update the current record. Now what we're going to be doing in this exercise is doing a field update, and we're going to operate on the owner field. And so somebody asked, well, can we automate this so that we always assign records to a queue or something like that? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do, is we're going to update the owner field to be equal to some particular, you know, in our case, the recruiter queue. Okay? You could, for that matter, change it to a specific owner, or user, I should say. Okay.
So we could do it without any criteria, because for that object, for example, always that queue will be the owner. So can we create rules without any criteria?
So you don't.
For example, we have an object called finance,
Uh-huh.
or salaries, and that object should always be owned by the finance group,
Yeah.
no matter what.
So correct me if I'm wrong. What you're saying is you'd like to have some entry criteria that are always, you don't want to have filters down here. Well, one of the workarounds that people have created is that if you do something like created date is less than or equal to, and then there's actually, you can do today, stuff like that. There's some special date fields. So in that case, you know that there's no such thing as a record that's created in the future. Therefore, if we get rid of this, and like so, so this way, this is a filter criteria that will always.
If you don't write anything, it wouldn't accept it, right?
Yeah. So see how it has that red bar up there indicating that's required. I'm not sure why they did it that way. There's also, people have done stuff to say that it does not contain, and then come up with something really weird. So you can, there's some workarounds essentially to make that always fire. So, okay. All right. All right. So there are 4 different types of actions. Like I said, task, email alert. A task is assigning a task to a specific person, a responsibility to do something. And then email alert, send them an email. And then finally, outbound message, which we'll talk about on Wednesday. A little bit more complex. Okay, so why don't we get going on our next topic, which is formula fields. All right. All right, so formula fields. What formula fields do is they calculate values that are populated in fields for the purpose of, for instance, let's say we want to do something like calculate a value which is going to be displayed in a field, and we could do something like perform a mathematical calculation. So let's say that we want to take, apply a discount to some sort of cost field in order to calculate the discounted price or something like that, or whatever it may be. The mechanism by which we can do that is formula fields to create that calculated amount. We can also do things like cross-object formula fields, and I'll talk about those in a second. Okay. All right. So let's talk about some of the considerations, then we'll jump into the UI. Like I said, either for calculations or display, it supports cross-object references. What I mean by that is that from a child object, you can navigate up to a parent or up to a grandparent or up 5 levels in order to reference a value up there and pull it down and display it on the child. Okay? So in our case, what we're going to do is, in the lab, we're going to display the candidate name, the candidate first name and last name, on the review. So because we're using a relational model, the candidate demographic information is up on the candidate object, right? But for the purpose of somebody who's looking at a review, we want them to easily know, well, which candidate is this for? Well, we can display that information using a formula field that's doing cross-object references. All right. Yeah, you can go up for a single reference, you can go up 5 levels, but the total number of objects that you traverse cannot be greater than 5. So if you go up 2 levels, if you have a different cross-object formula field that goes up 3 levels in a different direction, you can't go up anymore because those can't add up to more than 5. Does that make sense? All right, so let's show you the tool. All right, so the tool is, let's go to our setup menu, and then on an object, we can, let me get something that I can actually, here we go. So on an object, what we can do is create a new custom field, and here we're going to select formula as the type. Now when we select formula, what's going to be available, well, first of all, we got to give it a label, so demo formula, okay. What we need to do is we need to select the resulting data type that's going to be generated. So I'm going to select text. And what's going to happen is that whatever is returned as a part of the demo formula field is going to be equal to what I calculate right here. Okay? So notice across the top it says demo formula, which is name my field, which is text, equals, and then something that's returned here. Now there's 2 editors. There's the simple formula editor and there's the advanced formula editor. In my opinion, there's the good one and then there's the not so good one. The advanced one isn't really that advanced. So I just always use the advanced one, and it gives you a lot more flexibility. So what you get with the advanced formula editor is the ability to do the cross-object navigation. So here I'm on a review. Well, where can I go from a review? What's a related object? Not a candidate directly, job application. So if I want to get to the candidate, I can navigate using the job application. I can click on job application. So here are all fields in the first, or I should say the second column, that are local to the review. Now this is a set of fields that are local to the job application. if I wanted to get to a field on a candidate, I could then navigate, so from the review to the job application to the candidate, then I could access a field, like let's say first name, and then that's going to insert, that's going to generate the formula that's going to pull down the first name from the candidate so that I can display it. All right?
If you didn't select anything on the left, just right, and just select the candidate, would it bring the name field?
You mean what would happen if I...
There's one that has a greater than symbol and then the one that doesn't.
Yeah, so what happens when I select that? Good question. So what does happen? All right, so there's, here we're going to get back to the notation of the _C, okay? So notice that they're both seem to be referring to the same thing, but job application _R dot candidate _R dot first name _C. Like I said, that returns the value of the first name field on the candidate. What job application _R dot candidate _C returns is the record ID of the related candidate record. Okay? So there's a difference between _C when we're referencing the field and _R. Think of it as _C on a field that is a related, a lookup relationship or a master detail relationship, that returns the record ID of the related record. Okay? Now, _R, what this does, this is a pretty easy one to remember. This returns a reference to the related remote record. Do you need any more R's to remember that? All right, so when you see R, you can think remote, related, relationship, you know, there's all types of things. But think of it, it's kind of like if you've ever done object-oriented programming, you can obtain a reference to some other object, okay? And then once you have that reference to that thing, you can now do things to it. It's very similar to here. What _R does, it returns a reference to that remote candidate record, and now we can obtain information from that remote candidate. Okay?
So when it's for first name, C returns the field itself, but when it's in a parent, C returns the ID.
Yeah. So.
But if I say R at the end, the second one.
Oh, so what happens? What happens when you do this? You mean? Don't. I don't know, but you can't do it. So now it's something that we can do when we're writing Apex code, because in Apex code it's an object-oriented language. So this would return a reference to an object. So it's something that we could do there. We don't. This is not an object-oriented programming language, what we're using here. So here, this is just a mechanism to reference remote fields. So this doesn't do anything. This will cause a problem. So, okay. Yes.
If you were typing in the element that you want to include in this formula, and not using the navigation option,
yeah.
Do you always have to start with the uppermost level of that object? You cannot skip part of the description, ...
No, you can't. Yeah. In this case, the field that I created is on a review, and that's why I immediately. So if we launch this again, so notice that we're currently on a review. Here are all the fields on a review, and we can then link to another, like a job application. So it just assumes that the syntax starts at the job application because that's our first thing from the review, but we don't have to say review _R or C or whatever, because it knows that that's what we're local to. So, does that answer the question, or okay? Yeah.
So in the same way, if you wanted to access something that is above that level, you should add that portion, right? Can you access to?
Yeah, you have to go through each of the steps to get. So in my case, I wanted to access the candidate. I can only reference the candidate through the job application. So review to job application to candidate. I must go through that route because a review is not directly related to a candidate. Okay? So, all right. Yeah. So, in addition, it says, see where it says insert operator? So we can do things like we might want to calculate, we could perform a calculation. So in this case, experience is a number, and we could do some addition and also take leadership skills, which is also another number. And we could calculate experience plus leadership skills in order to calculate some number. We could do something like then divide it by 2 to calculate an average. We could do something like that, you know. Okay. Now ultimately, the formula is a single line of code. All right, so it's always going to be a single line of code. But you can do things for readability, like put in carriage returns and stuff like that. So the reason you would want to do that is that you can also use formula functions. Okay? Now formula functions give you the ability to do something like convert to lowercase, or to cut off trailing characters, or to, you know, find the higher of 2 numbers, something like that, or do some sort of manipulation. A classic one is the if statement. So we could do something like if, you know, if certain field, you know, which is, you know, if leadership scores are greater than 3, then we're going to return great, and if it's not greater than 3, what do we do? Follower, and then leader. Those are our 2 things. So in this case, this is a function, this if function. So if leadership skills are greater than 3, then we want to return the string leader. If it's less than 3, then we want to return follower. Okay? So there's a bunch of functions. We'll do more advanced things later on Wednesday. Insert hyperlinks and images. But as you can see, there's all types of stuff here associated with math and string manipulation that we can do. Okay? Yeah?
How would you navigate to the parent? Would you write parent dot, something like that?
How would, so the question is, how would you navigate to the parent? Are you referring to, so when I insert a field? Yeah. Okay, so how?
You can go down.
So job application is the parent.
I'm talking about, we are in the review.
Uh-huh.
So if,
Are
for
you-
example, in the object that we are in writing this to is a child of another object, and we want to see if that object's some property is something, then write this something like that. So for example, the application that we are using, you can navigate down, also, but you can also navigate up, like parent dot, dot, this kind of expressions.
Well, that's what we're doing here. Is so from the child, we are navigating up to the job application, then up to the candidate, and referencing a field on the, in this case, this is the grandparent. So candidate is a grandparent.
So if we were in the candidate, would we be able to go to the
Oh,
job
you want to
application?
go the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Oh, reference children. All right, no. Okay. So if you're on the parent can you reference the value of children? Not in a formula field, but we're going to talk about something in the next lesson called roll-up summary fields, in which we can calculate an average or something like that, or a sum. So we'll talk about how you would do that. But yeah, so there's something that's similar to this if you're going the other direction. All right? Yes, Roger.
You made the text field. If you stuck with the formula, would it have automatically converted that number to a text? Or would you have to do something in the formula to convert it to a text?
Oh, so for instance, if leadership skills returned, you mean like the question is, can we do it?
Your number is 520.
Uh-huh.
And you have it as a text field. Will it convert
okay.
the digits 520 into text
okay.
characters 520?
You know, let's see. So the question is, yeah, can I convert something that is, what is this? So here there's a function called value, and I just inserted it in between the double underscore C, but value converts a text string that represents a number to a number. So
no,
we'd
I mean to the final result, because you had defined that result of the formula as a text field.
Okay.
So if you kept the formula to return a numeric result, will it
Yeah.
automatically convert
Okay, sure. It's in our case, it's gonna. So there's no issue with there's no issue with storing numbers in text, because that's the looser type. The trick is the opposite direction. When you know that something that is a string or is a text, but you know it contains numeric values, you can actually, and then you can also do something, there's a is number, which maybe it's not available in formula fields here, but yeah, maybe that's in validation rules only. But yeah, so if you know, that would be fine. If you, yeah. You just need to use that, yeah. Okay. All right. There's one more thing I want to point out. You can go to the docs for your operators and functions, either by, there's a number of different things you can do. Click on help for this function. So this brings up the online help for value, in this case. One of Leah's pet peeves that she showed me is when you resize that window, it then loses its spot. Just click on help for this function again, and then it takes you back to that particular function. And then you can also, there are subsets of categories, different types, so you can narrow down if you want to do text manipulation. And then finally, there's resources on the CRM community, and our website is down right now. But if it wasn't, I'd be able to show you that there's some PDF documentation. There's a whole bunch of content out there that's available for you. That's a lot of it's oriented towards CRM, things that people have done using formulas and functions that are common uses of this feature. Okay.
For more information on Salesforce.com training and certification, please visit www.salesforce.com/training.